Hey guys, it's Lane here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing a comic book review. Sorry I didn't upload on Wednesday like I usually do. This is going to go up on Thursday because Wednesday was my birthday and I didn't really feel like doing YouTube stuff that day, so I didn't get a video out. So yeah, this should be up after I record this, so Thursday. And today we're doing a comic book review. Like I said, we're going to be looking at Camelot 3000, which apparently is actually a pretty seminal comic book in the sense that it changed a lot about how the industry kind of worked. It is not necessarily the first graphic novel, but as far as I understand it, it was the first maxi series, which is a concept that DC does a lot nowadays. Basically, it's anything that's not a miniseries, and miniseries are 5 to 6 issues. So anything above that, 8 to 10 to 12 to 16, is a maxi series. And apparently this was the first one. It was also pretty seminal in the sense that it was one of the first comics that properly had adult themes in it, like sexuality and actual sexual content implied. Actually, it kind of does happen in the book, but it is mostly implied. And I'm not really sure if this is like legit the truth or just kind of like the story that DC wants to tell. But it is mentioned in the beginning of the book, and you can look up the Wikipedia article of Camelot 3000 to kind of verify that. And I think there's more to it than that, but there's more ways that you can find the information. But it's pretty interesting. It has a foreword here that talks about that, and a pretty cool thing here about the two creators. So yeah, it's done by Mike W. Barr, who is kind of like a mild Arthurian legend fan, and apparently he was kind of started with DC in 1974, and eventually became an editor for the magazine or for the company. And the artist here is Brian Boland, and I think he was part of the British invasion of comics. He was British born, leading comic book illustrator for a long time. And he worked on Green Lantern, Superman, Batman, and some other stuff. And at the time of the original printing of this book, he was working on The Killing Joke. So he's a very important artist as well. So yeah, it's published by DC, as you guys can see right there in their kind of funky little emblem logo that I'm not really a big fan of, but it doesn't look too bad either. It's kind of fine. And the demographic here is mature. It doesn't say anywhere on the book, but based on the foreword, you can kind of, understand that that's what it's about. It is a mature series. I wouldn't necessarily say adult as in 18 plus. It doesn't have anything too egregious, but it's definitely not something that a 10-year-old would read. And honestly, I don't think a 10-year-old would be interested in this anyways, but a 13-year-old may or may not be interested and may or may not be able to understand the thematics that are in here, right? Or maybe it's not the right time to expose them to it, based on your preferences and your own views on that, right? So I would definitely say this is like a 16 plus type title, which is, mature. In terms of a genre here, it's basically Arthurian, it's sci-fi, it's space fantasy, ultimately, and it's really, really fun and really, really interesting. I quite like this. It's a 12-issue series. It's all collected in this one book. And this is originally printed in 1988. So I think this is a later printing. No, actually it says it's the first printing, and the initial magazine, like the 12 issues, were published from 1982 to 1985. So that's pretty cool. That means that they were printed like one every couple months, sort of. Yeah, because 12 issues once a month would be like a year and 2 months or something, because they don't publish them directly, one per month. But yeah, I think it published every couple of months. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, in terms of adaptation, it does not have one, but I think it'd be a pretty cool standalone DC movie that could work, or maybe a TV show. Maybe don't kind of call it a DC show or anything like that. Just kind of make it its own thing. And then, at the end of the series, be like based on the original kind of DC movie or DC comic book or whatever. Because I think it'd be interesting. It'd be like a space Game of Thrones. And it has enough melodrama and personal tension in it that it would be pretty interesting to see like a single season, 8 to 10 episode type of series about Camelot 3000, and it'd be really, really cool. I think I would be very interested in that. So, yeah, in terms of rating, it's a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's almost perfect, but there are some kind of issues with the way it ends that I think could have been better explained, and so it kind of kills the enjoyment just a tad. The premise here is basically that Earth is being attacked by these lizardy-looking aliens, and the Earth needs a hero, and so somehow that hero turns out to be King Arthur. And it's kind of because of the return of Arthur. Eventually, when England needs a hero, he will rise again. And it turns out that England needed a hero exactly then. And so he comes back to life. And then he gathers his merry band of men. And they fight against the alien invasion. And, other stuff ensues. And it's really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with this. I genuinely was very interested in this from beginning to end. I was very excited about reading it. It had all of the things that I like. I'm not necessarily a huge Arthurian legend type of guy, but I've seen Merlin, I've seen Avalon High. I understand the idea of Merlin and Arthur. I've read quite a few manga that kind of talk about Merlin. I think I saw the Stone Cauldron, is that what the movie's called? The one with the little kid and the little black cauldron there. I think that's what it was called. And so I've seen a lot of things in my years as a fantasy fan that connect to Arthurian legend, even though I've never really read the Arthurian legend or the Once and Future King by T.A. White, I think is their name. So a lot of this is interesting to me, even if it's not necessarily something I am intimately familiar with, but I really do enjoy it. So, yeah. The plot line here is that Earth is attacked by these lizardy aliens initially, and it's all kind of focused on England at first. And we follow these kind of generic characters that just kind of introduce the fact that, England is falling, people are dying, and things are horrible. We get introduced to this guy called Tom Prentice, or Tom Apprentice, I guess is what his name's supposed to be. I don't know if that's a reference to something or not, but he basically becomes the squire to King Arthur throughout the book, right? And so his family dies right before his eyes. He can't do anything to save them, and so he decides to kind of escape, and he looks for a specific place that he knows where he worked before. And while he's there, he actually accidentally walks right into a casket, and this casket is the one that belongs to Arthur. So he opens it with this power tool thing that he has, and Arthur awakens. He stands up gloriously in this very cool kind of like Aquaman / Captain America looking kind of armor that's kind of gold but has that kind of scaling to it that Captain America's armor has. And he's like, "Behold, I am Arthur. I have come back. What is the issue?" And so we get this kind of bit of exposition where Arthur talks to Tom, and Tom and Arthur interact and return, and kind of have all of this stuff going on. They kill some aliens, and then they go off to Stonehenge to go find Merlin. Once they're there, Merlin plays a trick on them, but eventually Arthur is forceful enough that he gets Merlin to appear, to come back. And so we have some more exposition there. Really cool interactions there. Apparently Merlin's the son of the devil. He is a dark wizard, but he's also quite meaningful and important. And of course he is Arthur's great mentor. And then Merlin sends them on another quest. We must collect all of the other knights of the Round Table. Go find them. And as he sends out this kind of, what's it called? This kind of like energy beam with memories, with these kind of spells attached to them, a hand, a manicured hand, a woman's hand, reaches out and grabs them and kind of distorts them just enough. So that means that they have to physically go see them instead of just kind of like wait for them to come to Arthur. And so Merlin sends them to each place, and through a convoluted process, basically, we get all of the knights. We get all of the ones that you can think of, Galahad, Percival, Lancelot, Guinevere. We eventually get Mordred, Morgan Le Fay, everyone that you can think of, that you can kind of name from the Arthurian legend, we see in some way or another, except the Green Man, but who cares about the Green Man, honestly. And so there we go. We get all of the knights. One of them happens to actually have been reincarnated into a female body. That would be Tristan. And there's actually issues attached to that. Tristan is not happy with the situation. There's issues there throughout the whole book. And their character specifically, I think, is quite interesting. And so, everyone is reincarnated now. And so they go battle some aliens. They do some stuff. And while they're doing all of this stuff, they're doing all of these plans, and they're kind of having to deal with the melodrama and the reality of, being reincarnated, having to adjust to their new lives, and deal with the emotional aspects of, hey, I know you, but I also don't know you, because you're not exactly the same person that you were before, back in the olden days. And then there's also this aspect of like Lancelot and Guinevere having, an emotional connection there that affects Arthur and everyone at the round table. And, while that's happening, apparently the world governments, the UN, run by this guy called Jordan, who turns out to be Mordred later, and the four major powers, which in this case is some sort of generic African country, China, Russia, and the US, are all plotting against each other, but also against Arthur, because Arthur shows up. He's like declaring that he's a king, and everyone kind of agrees with that. But also, if they agree to have Arthur as king, that means that they're also denouncing their previous governments. And there's this kind of imbalance. Of course, the story doesn't really focus on that, so it's not important, but it is a thing. And so there's this issue where the world leaders are conspiring against each other and against Arthur, while Arthur's fighting aliens, and it's a whole thing. And it's really, really enjoyable. I like everything here a lot. Overall, it's really, really good. There's a lot of fights. There's a lot of cool action here. And eventually, we do learn that the main villain, the villain behind everything, is Morgan Le Fay, who astral projected and then physically became, what's it called? Reconstituted, I guess, on this 10th planet beyond, what's the last planet in the solar system? Pluto, I guess. And this 10th planet is home to these lizard people that Morgan manages to turn into her servants. And it's her time to return. And it turns out that she returned way later than she anticipated. But the thing is that the story is still going to happen. And so she's basically kind of controlling everything. And ultimately she wants to kill Arthur and Merlin. And I think mostly she wants to kill Merlin more than Arthur. But either way, both of those things happen. And it's ultimately, an Arthurian battle between Morgan and Arthur. And it's very, very good. Like I said, there's a lot of melodrama, a lot of personal tensions that keep you interested throughout. Eventually, there's a major betrayal in the story that I think is really good. It kind of almost gave me this kind of like soap opera vibe to it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. And eventually, they go and get attacked. And then Tom actually gets hurt. And so they go off to search for the Holy Grail. And they find it eventually. Percival has to sacrifice himself. And then they launch an attack on the 10th planet. And so the story then ends after some sacrifice and some relatively good endings for different groups of people. However, I do think that the ending, the last issue of the story, needed to be expanded further, because there's a lot of things that are big issues throughout the book. And then in the last issue, in like a page or two, they're resolved. And I think that there needed to be more situations there. Maybe if it was written today, it would have been a little bit different. Like there was an opportunity for Tristan to be a character that maybe was okay with being a woman, but also maybe was interested in having both a male and female partner. And then that didn't really pan out, although it was clearly like stated that it might have been a possibility. And then there was this other issue where Guinevere and Lancelot obviously deal with the fallout of their situation. That gets resolved a bit too quickly for my taste, but it's also because the plot demands it. But then at the ending, it feels like they kind of got off scot-free without having to deal with the consequences of their actions. And it's not really my favorite, but I don't really hate it, because ultimately it is a relatively good ending. It's just like, I feel like there could have been more to it. And then some other characters have other issues like that, right? So, Yeah, otherwise though, I think the plot line's quite great. I really did enjoy my time with it overall, so don't really have any major complaints, but I feel like there could have been elements here that could have been better. So yeah, in terms of characters, we have Tom, Prentice, Arthur Pendragon, Merlin, of course. We have Guinevere, who actually is this woman called Joan Acton, and she is a military leader for the U.S. We have this philanthropist guy called Jules Frutel, who is Lancelot. Galahad turns out to be some Japanese dude who's actually like a samurai, like a tech samurai, which is pretty cool. Then we have Percival, who actually ends up being this kind of cyber troll man called a Neo Man. Then Sir Kay, I don't really remember who he is initially, but he ends up being, Arthur's brother, cousin person. Then we have Gawain, who happens to be the South African man. He's black, he's not white, because I think at that point they were it was like still during apartheid, but I don't really remember. But he is an African man from South Africa, and his actually story is quite good because he is a family man first and foremost. He has to go on this in order to save the world, but ultimately he just wants to be with his family, and he stopped from being with them throughout the whole story, and it's constantly an issue. So I quite like that. I really enjoyed his story. Then we had Tristan, who's actually Amber, and of course this is a big issue where Tristan was this very cool manly man back in the day, and then he got turned into this kind of weak female. And because these guys do follow this very ancient chivalric code, they kind of treat Tristan differently than they used to because she is a woman, and this kind of is grating to her for a long time. And I really enjoyed this aspect, although in a modern setting, it does feel a little bit outdated, or maybe a little bit too on the nose. It deals with things that maybe today we wouldn't really want to talk about, even though they are kind of clearly still accurate. It's just like we could have dealt with it differently. Particularly, there's this scene where it's showcasing her strength as a man, and she bends this bar, and then it kind of straightens out again, and then she gets turned back into a woman for a second, and she tries to bend the bar and she can't. Technically, maybe it is correct that, men are inherently stronger than women in terms of like their physical abilities. But if Tristan really cared that much, they could have just been training for a long time, and maybe wouldn't have made it exactly the same, but they could have overcome it. And in a modern book, that would have been kind of the case. And maybe we would have immediately seen Tristan/Amber go hit the gym and try to get buffer and stronger, right? So that they could overcome that kind of physical limitation. But because this is kind of not that, it kind of doesn't do that. And so it kind of has a lot of elements like that throughout the book. And some of them are honest and realistic, and some of them are like a little bit too misogynistic feeling. And it just kind of depends, right? As a man, I don't really have any problems with anything that's happening, but I can understand if female readers read this and they're like upset with the way that Tristan is kind of felt and kind of dealt with. So your mileage may vary there, but I personally really enjoyed their character arc, even if some stuff was a little bit kind of uncomfortable-ish, I guess. Then we have Mordred, and he turns out to be that UN guy, Jordan, and Morgan Le Fay, and obviously we have this other character called Isolde, or Isolde, I guess, and she is Tristan's ancient lover reincarnated into a person that looks exactly like her. So good stuff there with the characters. I really enjoyed all of them. In terms of world building, we get a aspect of World War III, and then this societal rebuild, which kind of isn't really utopian, but it's a little bit more utopian than you would think. But it's also a bit dystopian because anyone that is dissidents against the government or does any kind of crime immediately gets turned into a Neo-Man, which are these kind of like RoboCop-esque things. And so there's some issues, right? The vibe of the world is kind of techno-medieval, if that makes sense. It kind of has the very futuristic, colorful palette to it that I think was pretty popular before the 80s, before Terminator and stuff like that. Kind of almost feels like Buck Rogers or something like that. But it has this kind of medieval vibe to it. Like people wear skirts and fluffy pants and stuff like that. And it's pretty interesting. There's this, introduction to the 10th planet. These lizard people that are aliens Looked like generic evil aliens, maybe a little bit like Godzilla, but also to me, ultimately, they look like dragons or like dragon-esque creatures, and that works really well because even though maybe there weren't any dragons specifically in Arthurian legend, as far as I remember, although there was some in the Merlin show, so maybe, the idea of ancient knights fighting dragon people works really well, right? So I really enjoy that kind of limited element of world building there, so I quite like it. And there's a lot of other kind of things, but they're not really super important, so I didn't really want to feel like saying all of them, right? So yeah, in terms of artwork and fan service, the artwork is amazing. I really enjoy it. It does have this kind of old school style to it, and so it might not be everyone's favorite. And some of the facial expressions, specifically for Tristan, which is this character right there, didn't work that well. And I think partially, or at least the way I saw it, was because it's this female character with very female, fine features, kind of making faces that you would associate with like a male character doing. And so it looks weird, but it also is exactly what, is being trying to be portrayed. So I find it interesting. I also really like all of the characters' outfits. Specifically, I like Guinevere's outfit a lot. She looks really, really cool. And the artwork is really phenomenal. There's a lot of interesting stuff here that I like a lot. And there is kind of this like Buscema, Frazetta-esque kind of looking art here and there in some places. And I really do like it. I think it's really, really cool. I also really love the colors. They're very vibrant and kind of come off the page very nicely. There are some issues with the printing here and there early on in the first issue, but it's not really that big of a deal. It doesn't really bother me because you can still read it. So yeah, overall the artwork in the fan service is good. There's a lot of good artwork. The fan service scenes are very minimal, but they still exist. Usually it's with Morgana Le Fay, or when Guinevere and Lancelot are together, there's kind of the elements of that. So yeah, like I said, this is a mature book, so it has elements of stuff like that. And in terms of a rating, 4.5 out of 5. Just the last issue, I feel like it was missing some few key moments, and so that's why I can't give it a 5 out of 5. But overall, it was really good, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it was right up my alley. I don't necessarily think it's going to be up for most people, but if you can find a chance to read it, in some way, definitely give it a chance. It's really, really cool. It's really interesting. And hopefully at some point in the future, someone decides to make a 10-episode Game of Thrones in space, Camelot 3000 type of show, because it's really, really fun and really cool, and I really enjoyed it. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.